Once again, I welcome all our delegates. Welcome to the Industry Leaders panel discussion. Turbocharging the finance function through data-driven insights and business intelligence. Digital innovations are transforming organizations more fundamentally than the business world has ever seen. The finance function too must leverage digital tools to enhance its efficiency, effectiveness, and the experience of its stakeholders. As the future remains uncertain, finance leaders have a responsibility to be forward thinking and working to get the right people and technology in place. And allow me to welcome to moderate this session Rahul Chaudhary, partner Deloitte. I'd also like to welcome Meeta Agarwal, CFO, India and Southeast Asia, AB InBev. A warm welcome to Divya Kumar, Global Digital CFO, IKEA. Very warm welcome to Ramesh Bafna, CFO, Myntra. Thank you for joining us, Bhaskar A. Rao, CFO, Bangalore International Airport.
Right.
And finally, I'd like to welcome Giridhar Sanjeevi, EVP and CFO, the Indian Hotels Company. Well, thank you to all our esteemed leaders for joining us. And with that, I hand over to our moderator for this session, Rahul Chaudhary. So Rahul, over to you.
Thank you, Deepthi. A very warm afternoon to all of you. So if I ask you a question, what does a good life stand for you? What does a good life look for you? I think many of you will answer a good, comfortable, cozy stay at home, occasionally a relaxing weekend in a nice hotel, good experience when you're traveling, good dine and wine, and like a good sense of fashion around you. So today I'm delighted to be with a panel which makes that possible for all of us. So thanks all for joining us to talk about how your organization's journey has been on turbocharging the finance function. I'm really delighted to be here. So technology-enabled finance transformation has been the top priority for most CFOs in India and across the globe. We know any kind of transformation requires a discipline and sustained effort. So Giri, my first question to you, do you wish to share any such success stories which you have come across during the transformation journey of your organization's finance function, and especially where you have used data to take decisions?
No, thank you, Rahul. I think Indian hotels, I think the hotel sector is clearly getting disrupted all the more by the pandemic, where technology is beginning to play a very important role. I think historically, if I look at companies like ours, I think what I would say is that the first functions which kind of began to become very tech savvy was really revenue, because revenue is a very dynamic function, that the ability to change prices, look at different customer segments. And in my role as a CFO, I also manage the revenue function for the company. What I saw when I joined the company 4 years ago was that the revenue folks were really far ahead in terms of the digital transformation journey, the technology journey. And the rest of the organization was kind of playing catch up. To that extent, it was a two-speed organization. So therefore, speaking of revenue itself, I think some of the things that we have been able to do is really to get insights into on a dynamic basis, because hotels also is a micro market business. There is no such thing as pricing for Bombay. There is pricing for Bandra, and there is pricing for South Bombay. So I think so it's also a micro market business. So intelligence needs to be culled out at both levels so that you can be effective in each of those markets. So what we have tried to do is to make sure that we are able to pull together data, and there is also aided by industry sophistication. There are organizations like STR, for instance, where I think one of the great examples of competitors sharing information. So, for instance, our hotel in Bandra would actually share details of its some of the performances on to STR, which is an American organization. And STR would share it back on a no-named basis. And you also define what is called as a comp set. It's a very interesting, where you say, I always compare myself with my competitive set. So every hotel has a defined competitive set. So STR would actually give me back the data every day, which defines the performance of the hotels without naming the hotel. And that allows me to change pricing depending upon how I see the comp set performance moving, to be honest, actually. And I think in all of this, it is the finance function has played a role in terms of enabling this technology to make sure that we're able to maximize revenues for the particular hotel action. So that is one part of work that we have been doing actually on the revenue side. I'm trying to get into big blocks actually. The other side has been really on what I would call as from a pure finance function perspective. I think as legacy corporation, two things happen actually. I think number one is that people have been working for 25, 30 years plus in the company. And therefore, not all of them are kind of tech savvy in terms of its thinking. And that's always a challenge in terms of reskilling. And I think, and there will be many organizations in the audience who will face the challenge of reskilling as they try to go tech in terms of what they want to do, to be honest. And therefore, our attempt in terms of the functional transformation, I think one is to do a transformation vis-a-vis customers like revenue, and one is a functional transformation which impacts people. I think we have been very empathetic in terms of how we have done it. So a couple of things we have tried to do as an example. So number one is the movement to the shared services itself. Well, shared services as a philosophy has probably been in existence for several years. I used to work in London in Diageo maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and we had a sophisticated shared services center for Europe out of Budapest as an example. I think companies like Indian Hotels have started the shared service journey much, much later actually. And therefore, our shared services journey has allowed us to sort of help move towards a business partner function where the hotel teams can get smaller, where hotel teams will do everything. Now the hotel teams are getting smaller in terms of business partner focus, and the entire transactional processing moving to shared services, which can then take care of the entire trial balance, P&L balance sheet and all that. So that's been the second part of the journey that we've been doing. The third thing, which in terms of the tech journey that I've tried to work on personally, is that when you're working in a multi-store environment, when you have 150 hotels, and that applies to retail organizations and any organization which has multiple stores actually, I think the question for me is that how do I know that my financial controller in Srinagar is working with the same efficiency as my financial controller in Coimbatore, for example. And there, one very interesting experiment we did, which has been wildly successful, is a very simple app, which has got 10 questions with 10 control questions, to be honest, actually. A yes means it's working, no means it's not working. And across my 100 hotels plus, I've identified three people in the function to fill in. So 300 people have to fill in that questionnaire actually every day, which means sitting in Bombay, my controller in Bombay will be able to say, if somebody has not filled in that questionnaire for the day, will know who has not filled in. But more importantly, if question number 5 is a no in one hotel, then I know that it's a problem in that hotel. But if the question number 5 is a no in 10 hotels, then I know there may be a systemic challenge somewhere actually. So I think what this kind of a very simple app development, which is kind of costed me maybe 5 lakhs as an example. I think has allowed me almost a daily access in terms of what is happening in the hotels, which controls are working, which controls are not working. And there's also, what do you say, if somebody answers a no, it also gets escalated. So I also build in review, because I think what we have been trying to do is evidence-based control. I think for me, I think in large organizations, one of the most important challenges, how do you build evidence-based control? And as you get into ICFR, I mean, internal financial control stuff with KPMGs and up the world do it, I think this has also allowed me. So I would say, therefore, the tech enablement has been at multiple levels. So number one is pure revenue functions, which doesn't touch the teams. The second thing is what touches the teams. And secondly, the whole control infrastructure. And the reskilling imperative, of course, has been a very, very important part of the tech journey, actually, because we can't fire people. I think we have to motivate people to sort of upgrade themselves to sort of go to the more tech world. I think that is what I would broadly say is my journey.
Thanks, Giri. I absolutely loved, I think, the example you gave where you have made an app for 100 hotels, 10 questions, and you get to know real time and pinpoint like where the issue is really. And I'm just wondering, like, if you did not have an app, how would you have done that exercise? Like, I think you would have got the information maybe a week later, and the issue might not have been relevant anymore.
That is true.
Great. Ramesh, you represent a very different world. Myntra is a household name. So would you like to share some success stories like Giri just shared?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Giri, for sharing this. On Myntra side, right, we are born digital from that perspective. But having coming to the finance function per se, right, the way I classified is mindset, tool sets, and skill sets, right? So in terms of first being mindset, as a CFO, how am I looking at a function transforming over next year, 2 year, 3 year framework, right? And how do I see in the industry the best in class and putting a vision together. Then in terms of skill sets, understanding where the skill sets are in each of my teams. If I break it into controllership, FP&A, and business finance, right? So the maturity level in each of these teams are at the different levels, right? So FP&A will be a little more sophisticated than controllership, and the journeys which has to be charted out are very different for each of these functions, right? So in understanding the current skill sets I have in my team in terms of other CAs or BComs or MBA plus IT, introduction of campus talent, introduction of MBAs, and a mix of skills, right? Of talent is extremely important. Second thing which we did it is base understanding of technology, right? Writing a SQL query is like a base understanding which we have gone through every single person in the finance function, so that we are not dependent upon a BI team or a data analyst for us to retrieve reports, right? So in terms of understanding that, and I think that elevated the productivity significantly, right? The third thing is the tool sets. How did we go about in terms of working with the CTO of the organization? On the controllership side, working with some of the RPAs and SaaS providers in terms of automating the processes, understanding how we can do things at speed. On the FP&A side, typical working with tableaus of the world and visualization tools in terms of creating those reports. If I look at my FP&A team, I will get the P&L by financial and non-financial lever of yesterday at morning 9 o'clock, right? It's there. The financial transparency in last 2 years have improved significantly, where every member basis their need basis at 9 o'clock in the morning is aware of their entire GMV, profitability, customers, new acquisition, every single aspect which is there. Right? It's developed in financial planning team. The next aspect is business finance. How do we then work with the business partners and enable the right business decision making in terms of selection, in terms of customer, the cohorts, and going deeper and partnering with businesses using the financial. There's a vantage point which finance has, right, in terms of accessing data across the company and then linking it to any business case which comes in at a real-time basis. So in terms of transformation, it's been these three sets mirrored by the maturity of these and having a clear vision in terms of time, right? It's not going to happen in 1 quarter, 2 quarter, but very clear charter of 2 years. Then how do we celebrate from an execution process, celebrating those milestones, celebrating every single needle movement which has happened across every teams in R&R, be it quarterly or annual functions we have within the function and outside the functions, and measuring it, right? So once you measure it, once you start celebrating it, then things become very streamlined. Right? So it's been a phenomenal 2 to 3 years in Myntra for me, and the transformation which we have seen as an organization is fantastic. That's from my side, Rahul.
So Ramesh, I loved it when you said that as an organization you were born digital, and then I think we keep hearing this cliche of system, people, and processes. I think you replaced people by saying mind and mindsight, and processes with toolkits. So I think that was very interesting. Thanks for that, Ramesh. Moving on, in the past decade, like big data, analytics, IoT, AI, ML have accelerated the disruption of traditional finance. These new technologies enable companies to gather and analyze vast amounts of real-time information about their businesses and continuously refining their financial foresight in the process. The market is ever in search of more accurate predictions and eagerly consumes this new up-to-the-minute information. So my question to you, Meeta, is do you think relying solely upon historical information may not lead to the accurate decision making and what CFOs are looking towards today in terms of predicting information and in terms of not just reporting yesterday, but reporting tomorrow and like reporting tomorrow accurately?
Yeah, thank you, Rahul, for the question. I think you're absolutely right? And last quarter, 2020, really showed us that even as we were in the fast-changing business landscape, right, we were constantly challenging the traditional views of finance function, their capabilities. The pandemic really accelerated this and highlighted vulnerabilities of both historical assumptions, forecasting models, as well as the data that they were based on. Right? If I take my own sectors example, which is the alcobev space, right? March of 2020, most organizations in my sector were gearing up for the next big summer and the peak, right? Suddenly there's a nationwide lockdown on 23rd of March and you don't know what to do. You're sitting with a huge pile of stock, looking, with a short shelf life, and there is nothing in the historical data that can help you predict what's going to come next. So if that was not a catalyst, nothing else will be. And I think as we look at finance processes along the way, more importantly, FP&A, I think businesses need the capability to revise their plans and adjust their assumptions as fast as the real world events. And it's not really easy because a lot of organizations who are in Ramesh's term, not born digital, who have been there for a certain age and space, a lot of processes are largely manual, they're time and resource heavy. And add to that lack of confidence in historical data, you have a potent combination with trouble written all over it, right? So I think predictive analytics is no longer an option. It's something that we need to adopt. And I agree with Giri when he said that when you look at typical first adopters, it's revenue and customer acquisition related aspects that we see being the first adopters. But that said, I think over time, functions like supply chain and finance have really stepped up. I think if I look at within finance, right, starting points, looking at my own organization for us have been starting to use machine learning capabilities to look at historical trends and maybe just start forecasting sales, right? For example, next year is going to be an election or past, just basic things, building blocks which can help us predict what the sales patterns would be. It's as simple as, installing RFID programs in your warehouses, which can help you track pallets of beers, where they are brewed, where they are to the wholesalers, and then maybe forecasting out of stock, forecasting inventory patterns, what could potentially expire, and the kind of hit you could have on the PNL. So from what Ramesh said of being able to look at a PNL at 9 o'clock, also being able to predict what could my PNL for the month end look like. And that's the journey that I think most CFOs right now need to embark on as well as accelerate. Because whilst, also to say the opportunities are endless, each and every line item across the P&L management can be digitized. But at the same time, there needs to be a lot of caution in terms of how to use the data. Predictive analytics, it comes at its own, perils with data privacy, the ability to use it correctly within all your legal and compliance frameworks. So that's something to be cautious about. But needless to say, embarking on this journey or adopting predictive analytics is really not an option anymore.
Meeta, just an interesting story. So you mentioned RFID tags in your fast-moving inventory. I remember the times like when I was an auditor almost a couple of decades back, and we would actually climb up on cranes, and those are the ways you would do the physical verification and get to know your real stock. So that's quite exciting, like the journey we have made from there. Divya, now if I were to ask you the same question, but before that, like something very interesting I noticed, Divya, when I was looking at your business card, like your designation reads as digital CFO. So that was something like which was quite unique. So maybe like a little bit of story behind that and your views on like what's in store for predictive reporting.
Sure. Thank you, Rahul. So to start a little bit with why digital CFO, right? Our company took a call about 3 years back saying that they're going to combine everything digital, right? So it's not just about technology, it's about technology, data, analytics, and the e-commerce and all the other channels. I mean, all the digital tools required for everything new and digital together under one head. And then the concept of a CFO for that came up, right? Which means that, of course, it's not just about cost, it's about revenue, it's about that entire digital business as such. To answer your question, right? I mean, the CFO as such has never been about the past, right? The CFO function, if you look at it. So, of course, we have controllership, et cetera, but it's always been about how do you build a sustainable revenue for the company, sustainable profitability for the company. That has always been really core also of the CFO's job, because at the end of it, it's to help with business steering. It's not really about, okay, what happened or what the numbers are. And if I look at it in that context, there has always been prediction, right? Over the last, whatever, we do forecasting, we do scenario planning, etc. It's about what has changed from then to now. And what has really changed is exactly like Meeta said, firstly, the pace of business, right? And the pace of what you need to do. And the second thing is also explosion of data, right? So how do you consume that data really? And I've been really lucky, I think, that in at least the last 10, 15 years in my life, I have been as close to analytics as I have been to finance. And these two are just so entwined now that you cannot really break them out. If you look at my own company, we are in 40 countries, right? So every day, every minute, there is sales being generated, there's fulfillment happening, something else happening. And in a global role like this, when I look at all that data, how do I consume that data? How do I make the right predictions? Right? And then how at a local level do the countries make the right predictions? Because there's some global predictions required, there are country predictions required, right, in order to run your business. And that's where I think all the new technologies really play a role, right? So the fantastic part is that there are tools now to ingest this data. There are tools now, exactly like what Meeta was saying. It could be machine learning and different forms of artificial intelligence, forecasting tools, etc. But the interesting part, after being very close to this, right, is that any tool, any of these technologies, at the end of it runs on a data model, right? The data model, at the end of it, you may have some futuristic assumptions. What would your weather look like? What would your, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But anywhere between 70 to 99% of the data is actually historic that is getting ingested, right, into these data models. So at the end of the day, if you look at it conceptually, right, we're not doing anything very different from what we did in the past. And I'm not just talking about IKEA or anything, I'm talking about if you look at any of these models that are built across, right? So, and that being the case, it's going to take a long time for those models to actually evolve, because a machine learning learns, right, over time. And that learning over time takes, data for years and years and probably decades, which is not always available to you right now to actually make those predictive models really strong. So what has ended up happening, and let's take the COVID instance itself, right? 1.5 years, we've had data that is skewed because the customer behavior has been different from what it has been in the past, and everything has changed. Now, if you ingest the data directly into your data model along with your past data, right, the predictions you're going to be getting out of those are also not going to be really reliable, right? And I think that's where the role of the CFO really becomes important, because it becomes more about judgment. At the end of the day, the models are tools, right? Just we had Excel in the past, which was very basic. And then now you have all these fantastic tools which should be used because they're so fantastic. But they give you recommendations. We need to understand that these are recommendations, right? If you go ahead and follow everything the tool says, you probably will make a mistake, right, in the process of that. And I mean, of course, there are biases. There are so many things involved in that. So my thought process is that, I think CFOs now really need to understand analytics. So this is not about following or taking the output of analytics. We need to understand what goes into analytics, what is the input of analytics, right? What are these inputs of the model, so that they're able to then use their judgment, which they have gained over years and years and years, to actually guide the business to make the right decisions based on these models and based on this analytics. But I agree with Meeta. I mean, it's no longer a choice. And also it's a fantastic thing. I love analytics. I'm passionate about it, right? And I follow every trend there. And to me, it is like, it is not a choice. It should be in the business, but always with a pinch of salt, right? Always, we should always wear our own lens and take a look at it rather than follow it blindly.
Thanks, Divya. I think what you mentioned in terms of data analytics and then followed up by data visualization, is definitely something very, very, very crucial for the finance function. Now, if I talk about using financial data as fuel for decision making, definitely requires heavy investment in terms of money as well as like the time the people have to spend on that. Traditionally, finance has always been seen as a cost center which supports a business and rarely as a function which creates value. Now, any transformation project within the finance function has to overcome this challenge by the CEO and the different stakeholders of like where is the value. So, Bhaskar, my question to you: how do you, as head of your organization's finance function, justify the value creation through these projects? Even broader question is: do you yourself see that value creation in the first place, or still consider it merely as a capex to be there at the right time?
Thanks, Rahul, and thanks to all my other co-panelists. It's been so interesting hearing you. In fact, I would say we were born physical, not digital. Airport is mostly physical, but the pace at which we see the exploding or the use of data is phenomenal. The data was always there. I mean, going back probably, I've had a long journey where everything was physical, even in our accounting function, and everything has become digital. We have over the last few years realized that data will have to help us, and we'll have to use data analytics and what we learn from data effectively in order to like enhance revenue, like Giri rightly said. Airports are considered as business of business. I mean, it's just not a runway or a terminal, but we have cargo, we have ground handling, we have F&B, we have retail, we have car parking, so many different areas of revenue, and it's quite complex that each of them have their own different metric to be driven to maximize. So from that perspective, analytical approach to maximizing revenue is only through data, including, I mean, we have so many different parts of the airport, generating their own level of data. For instance, AOCC, develops its own data or generates its own data as to the flight schedules, the number of passengers, when it is going to land, when it is going to take off, what's the time it will be using the stands or the bridges, etc. These, there could be impact of weather and how we can, assimilate the weather forecast into this in order to develop a reasonable forecast as to what sort of, passengers would travel on that particular day, how that would impact the requirement of the utilization of the terminal, as well as what sort of impact it will have on our aeronautical and non-aeronautical revenue. So it's a very powerful thing that we have realized, and we have now started bringing together all data into certain platforms which are getting generating so much of analytics, and we are learning, still continuing to learn from that. In fact, other than enhancing revenue, we also think that airports should not be built on bricks alone. It should be more bytes, and this is something that we have taken a decision quite a few years back, saying that it should be bytes and not bricks in enhancing the utilization of capacity. And this we have done tremendously. In a sense, it's still an ongoing where the face recognition software, which will eliminate all sort of paper or document based access to airport right from the entry gate to the boarding gate. The speed at which we can move passengers from, let's say, the boarding gate to the retail and F&B areas so that they can spend more over there. It helps, one, passengers get delighted with that. Number two, it also improves our efficiency overall and towards that queue management system, which again is a data which generates based upon peak hour, based on slack hour, and the number of resources that we would have to put. The speed at which we can clear the, let's say, the security, which again is so very important that there are no queues which form over there, and passengers can move quickly. So the Terminal 2, which we are now currently building, one of the key pillars is digital adoption to build a better and more useful terminal. So now again, COVID-19 has put aviation is one of the sectors which has got tremendously impacted. Not only an airport, airlines primarily, and then airport, and then the other. So allocation of what resources you have, I mean, fund allocation towards digital is so very important, and it has to come at the cost of some other fund allocation that can go into other capacity building or operational expenses. And this is one of the key challenges that we have seen in the last 18 months, that allocating funds for digital enhancement and making a digital terminal has become very important for us, both from a perspective of revenue enhancement as well as capacity building and cost optimization. So this has, I would say some of the key things that we have looked at in all this period is to also move away from a perspective of just doing a capex, but to more on a sort of a partnership basis, where we would want our digital application developers to be partnering with us, because these are all very long-term sort of engagement, where they will also have a skin in game. They will also have an upside based upon our successes. And towards this, we have already, recently have a very large partnership that we have gone into IBM. So from that perspective, I would say data is, and the power of the data is going to improve airports, is going to improve customer satisfaction, is going to improve the revenue and bottom line. So that would be my take on this.
Bhaskar, I think your message to all the delegates here is loud and clear. Invest in bytes, not in bricks, or rather invest more in bytes than on bricks. Excellent. So Giri, I think you briefly touched upon this when you were speaking. You mentioned that you were playing the dual role and were also looking at revenue. So what are some of the examples or stories like you would like to share, like in terms of where the finance function has looked at more in terms of value creation than just adding on to cost?
Yeah, no, I think, I'm a big believer in this actually. I think while I do tend to ask the question, show me the money. I think the reality, especially in pandemic, I think pandemic is probably a useful start to say that at a time when we were staring at near zero revenues, I think the question is that we all have to live in the realm of possibility. So therefore, one of the things I've always tried to do is to encourage investments and allow experimentation. I think in the pandemic has probably been the best time when we have allowed experiments to be done. Example, when the pandemic hit, then the trend that we anticipated was people will be happy to drive to new destination. Driving distance holidays people will take, as opposed to take a flight because of the fear of catching COVID on flights. So we had to do something around what we called as driving destination holidays, actually. And therefore you end up doing some stuff around enabling it in terms of how do you develop programs for that? How do you reach out to customers? How do you get into some of the search engine optimization so that people can pick up? How do you access your loyalty bases and all that? So I think the attempt that we have tried to do during the pandemic phase is that if there is one line of P&L where I have allowed incremental spends is actually on digital. That's where we have said we should spend more. And we have allowed people to experiment. And I think because ultimately, I think the ability to experiment is very critical actually. And today, I think with tools such as A/B testing and all that, where, supposing somebody wants to do, has one idea and somebody else has another idea. It's possible to do A/B testing and allow people to try both and decide what you want to do actually. I think gating is important. And the reason I think many times gating becomes important in all of these is that you start with multiple milestones and then you allow people to spend. And once you hit a milestone and you see how it's going, you allow people to spend more actually. I think the role that we end up playing in finance is what I would say is to allow expense to happen, take measured risks, and ultimately help towards revenue optimization, cost optimization, whatever you call actually. I think, but definitely that's been the focus of the function, and that generally should be the focus of the function. While you say that finance has been less value accretive, I'm not sure I agree with that. To be honest, even when you talk of a simple thing like shared services as an example, I think lots of people do shared services when they talk about outsourcing accounting. That's not the case. So, for instance, I remember when we set up the shared service center in Budapest, I think we kind of looked at very clear metrics like treasury as an example. Think of treasury back office, middle office, front office. So you said front office would be in London, but back office and middle office would be. So when you try and break that up, what tends to then happen is that even as something as simple as shared services, you can actually define it by saying what is the highest value areas that you do here. Like I remember when the shared services center came up with multilingual speakers in Budapest, actually, we were able to bring down revenues, receivables in a very significant way. So I'm just saying that I think finance does play a role in terms of driving the value accretion across, actually. And that has got to be the mindset as well.
So I'm so glad, Giri, you brought this perspective. I think I was reading in a recent survey by Deloitte that about 45% of CFOs and senior finance executives believe their approach to innovation is too conservative. Yeah. And I think they have a fear of failure. I think 1/3 of them do not, they shelve innovation just with the fear of failure. I think like the mindset that to invest more and more in digital, I think that's the right way to go about. Coming back to Divya, apart from what we've discussed, like what kind of challenges do you see which hinders organizations to apply these innovation in their organization? Everyone knows that they have to do it. Everyone knows they have to start. So how do they start? Where do they start? What are the challenges and where do you see organizations getting stuck?
I would say there are three big challenges, right? One is simply change. Correct. I mean, now Giri was speaking about his organization, very old organization. The same with mine. I mean, it's greater than 75 years old, right, at IKEA. And I think change is something that if you need to take an organization along with, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, right, and create change there with innovation, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes a mindset, right? And it doesn't happen easily. It doesn't happen organically, right? It's something that needs to be focused on, something that needs to be nurtured, and something that needs to be really, especially in the technology context, right? Operational innovation happens on the ground. Technology innovation doesn't as easily happen on the ground. So that's the difference between the two of them. The second challenge I see is that, most big organizations, I mean, Ramesh was saying Myntra is a new organization, so they probably have the latest systems, right? But most of our older organizations do have systems that have grown over many, many years, right? They do a function in a certain manner. If you take innovation and just bolt it onto any old system, it doesn't happen that easily, right? So it needs to be something that needs to be thought through. It needs to be something that can be easily done, and changed and so on and so forth, which is a process by itself. And it is also, I would say, challenge by itself, right? Now, if you look at the third part of it, we forget that any technology change we do leads to a process change, right? At the end of it, anything you do that you innovate on from a technology perspective, it lands on the ground with somebody to be able to do their job in a slightly different manner, which means training, which means again, change management. So we reach the circle, which goes back to the first point I was, I was mentioning. So there are lots, it's not as easy, I would say, in a large organization to just have innovation grow organically. And it needs to be a focus. So the way that we've dealt with it, and I've really seen some really successful companies deal with it, are basically in two things. One is executive sponsorship is really important, right? So if the CEO has a mindset of innovation, CFO has a mindset of innovation, executive team has a mindset of innovation, it cascades, right? Because then you're applying it, you're encouraging it, exactly like Giri said, you're applying funds to it, right? So you're encouraging it in ways that actually you're making sure your organization believes in it at every level, right? So that helps in the change management. It helps in everybody being on the same page. The second thing I would say is that implementation is really important, right? Because I mean, most big companies have big processes, have big things. You break one part of the chain, all parts of the chain will break, right? So how do you implement? And that's why it is so important to make sure innovation is in a way that you test and learn. Right? So you're able to test it, you're able to do some fantastic things, you're able to test it, you're able to learn from it, you're able to measure it. It is important, right? It's important to measure, saying if I do X, Y will happen, right? And that's the purpose of my innovation. That's what it leads to. It's then important to apply it on a smaller scale first, right? Where you then make a success story. Because again, going back to change management, the way that people really jump on the bandwagon is if you're successful. Now, if you do something with innovation that actually leads to an increase in revenue, leads to a decrease in cost, leads to something else, customer experience, right? Immediately everybody is like, I want to do this too, right? So it immediately changes the mindset, right? Of then it's no longer about what do I need to change, but I really want this because it can help me. And then it becomes really easy to then scale it up, right, in the right way. And to do these three phases that I was talking about, the testing, small scale, and then the large scale, you need a strong enough process, right? This is not something that you can just leave on its own, where it just happens and then, you do it in an ad hoc manner. It's important for companies to have a strong enough process that says that this is how I'm going to lead that innovation down all the way from when it is conceptualized and experimented, like, my guests here, I mean, my friends here are saying, right, that you actually make experimentation possible, but you also make implementation possible, right, by a structured process where it leads to actually the value that, Giri was speaking about earlier, where, it leads to also people seeing that value and then being a part of that value.
Yeah, just build on it, Divya, actually. I think one of the things that I read about recently, and I completely agree, is that culture eats data for breakfast. Actually. People say culture eats strategy for breakfast, but culture eats data for breakfast. And the reason it does is, if you want to introduce something new, I think people will say the boss is right. I mean, many organizations is always about boss being right. And therefore, that's one culture I've seen. The other culture is that not invented here. It's not the way things have been done here, actually. And hence, I think the whole approach in terms of, doing it step-by-step fashion is very good, actually. And one thing I would say is that I'm taking a minute to explain what I'm saying. That one framework which I found very useful is a GAME framework, actually, GAME, where it is really defining what you are trying to achieve. I think, and A is what you're doing to achieve that in terms of whatever digitization and all that. And M&E is really the measurement and evaluation. So it's a very framework in terms of GAME. If you do, it really helps in terms of building the successes that you spoke about. And I think it's important to pick early winners, actually. And that's the way you convert. And ultimately for people, especially in the digitized world, the biggest challenge that people face is, especially in the reskilling challenge that I spoke about. I think people wonder whether I lose my job and do I have to go somewhere else, actually. And I think as long as you're able to demonstrate that what is in it for me is answered successfully, I think the change management that you described works very well.
Absolutely.
So Meeta, here is the paradox. Now, I think a little bit earlier, Giri spoke about like, where is the money? Show me the money. And Divya spoke about like perseverance and patience in terms of achieving success. So in your experience, like any stories to share, like what are some of the challenges you have seen? Where have organizations got stuck and how can they get out of it?
Yeah, thanks, Rahul. So, to a large extent, right, I agree with what Divya already mentioned, right? For me, I think the three biggest challenges that kind of become hurdles or roadblocks to typical organizations who've been longer is one, sponsorship. I won't delve into further. She's already spoken at length about it. The second bit is about having an end-to-end view, right? What happens typically is most functions and technology work in silos, right? There's inadequate collaboration. There are different teams competing for same resources on technology, and communication is scarce. So you have multiple legacy systems, different teams, and then you get into that bolt-on model or a bolt-on technique where, oh, okay, let me address this via Salesforce. I'm looking at customer acquisition. Let me do this, versus an end-to-end view. So whilst these siloed structures may have earlier worked, I think there is a lot of merit in organizations starting to look at the digital agenda as a full-on enterprise schematic versus just going function by function and trying to fix or trying to bring in those efficiencies. So that's one, right? The other bit is, how do you view the digital journey and how do you view all this money that you're putting in? Is it investment? Or is it a cost or a capex, right? The moment organizations start viewing this as an investment versus it being a cost is where the mindset changes, right? So the idea is that one, you invest first of all upfront in change management capabilities, because there's no point in putting in money into technology, bringing in the systems, etc., when you don't have the right resources and the people to kind of implement it and see it through. And I think they were also called it out. So the idea is hard truth is digital transformation costs, right? And the innovators and the executors have to be willing to invest in that. So top sponsorship, having an overall end-to-end organization view, and making sure that you view it as an investment which is slightly longer term and will bring in synergies and efficiencies at a certain point of time is what are the three most critical levers that I believe any organization should have as a change before embarking and as they go along this journey.
Thanks, Meeta. I absolutely agree with you. We have to treat it as an investment and not as OPEX versus a CAPEX discussion. Coming back to you, Ramesh, like the last time we would have seen the pace of innovation, what we are seeing in the last 18 months, like would have been like maybe around 2008 when the Lehman crisis had happened. So how has COVID accelerated or how has COVID contributed in this whole journey of advancement and digitization for finance functions and for organizations?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. In terms of, I would say, finance organization across, right, as a community, we did not waste the crisis, right? We all the board members started asking for digital. CFOs took these opportunities to become digital. I should congratulate all the finance community here in terms of taking and not wasting this crisis. I'll give you an example. We deal with more thousands of brands and sellers, right? There are offline stores, and then there was either offline or online, right? We have been, as Myntra, pushing around the omni-channel strategy in terms of how do we connect your stores to an online segment, right? The moment we saw COVID and there was an event which was unprecedented and not known, the finance community ended, and so did the business come back and said, how can we work together, right? In last 2 years, the pace in which our ecosystem have developed in retail is phenomenal, right? And a lot of credit goes to this community in terms of pushing that lever forward. In terms of Myntra and in Flipkart as a whole, we have accelerated those discussions across our ecosystem partners, right? And how can we leverage some of our understanding, some of our technologies, and extend it to offline stores, extend it to the partners we have, both in the sourcing world, in terms of manufacturers, and in the retail world with the shops, right? So the end-to-end ecosystem has developed significantly well in last 2 years.
Excellent. And I would have loved to continue this discussion with this esteemed panel. Bhaskar, any concluding remarks? I think like if I look at how February 2020 was for us, and then like suddenly what came in March 20. Likewise, what March 21 was like, how things were looking, and suddenly like how April 21 and May 21 turned out, like with the second wave. So how has COVID thrown in opportunities for your organization?
So, COVID has been a period of great learning and innovation as well. I mean, it's moved us from our, comfort zone into a totally new zone where we have started learning new methods of managing an airport. I mean, we've moved from a 32 million passenger in, let's say, 1920 to sort of a 11 million passenger the next year. And this year, maybe 16 million passengers. The change has been phenomenal. And this is really put our entire team, strategy and digital, everybody to come together to find how we can make it safe. I mean, one of the key things that we had to look was how to make it safe for passengers to come and be comfortable using an airport, using an airline. And that meant that first of all, we had to go for a contactless sort of a solution quickly and make it possible, and also convince and be convincing that the passengers also believe that this is the way we need to go. So, for us, this has been a defining moment as far as the airport is concerned. I mean, a seamless passenger journey, contactless, and also a cashless sort of a retail and a F&B. And it's sort of transformed the entire airport, like I was telling you earlier also, from our traditional way into a new digital way. And this is actually work in progress. And I think this is going to be really the defining moment for most businesses. And I hear everyone talking right from the traditional businesses to the new businesses, for everyone, this is a period of transformation. And I think we've all benefited out of it. And
Right.
rightfully, the entire CFO community has done a tremendous job in this transformation.
I think I absolutely agree with you, Bhaskar. So the last few years have been so exciting. So I'm quite excited about like what next 4 to 5 years will have in store for us. And with the thoughts you've shared, like it looks quite promising. Thank you all the panel members. I think it was wonderful interacting with you and hearing your perspectives. With this, I will hand it over back to Deepti. Deepti, over to you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Rahul. And indeed, what a great discussion with such industry stalwarts. So, a lot of valuable inputs and knowledge for our delegates. Well, our next session, ladies and gentlemen, is a presentation by one of our partners. So, do stay glued. I'll see you there.